Okay, so good morning from Tel Aviv. Good afternoon to our guests and panelists from Tokyo. We're very happy to have all of you here on a webinar relating to healthcare opportunities for Israeli companies in Japan. We have some very distinguished panelists and guests that will be joining us, and I hope you will enjoy the coming hour and that you will receive as many inputs as you can in order to consider the amazing opportunities the market has to offer. My name is Guy Lachman. I am a senior partner in the law firm of Perel Cohen. It is one of the largest Israeli law firms, and I am focusing on technology. My second and more favorite focus is on Japan, and I lead the firm's Japan practice group. I'm very fortunate to work with some of Japan's largest corporations in their activities locally. This I'm joined in this event by some of the most, I think, important players when considering the opportunities and the issues involving entering the Japanese healthcare market. Each one of them will shortly present him and herself, and we would then jump into our panel discussion. I think that, before starting today, I thought a little bit on the things, reflected on the things that I can say in this welcome notes. I think I've heard, I attended a webinar recently in which a very, very senior businessman said that during 2020, he learned more than he learned his entire career, given the uniqueness of this year, the challenges that it brought, um, and also the opportunities. I think many of you could agree that nobody really prepared us for the sorts of challenges that we are confronting this year. And I'm happy to see humanity survived, and we are all in good shape and in good health. And this is a promising note for 2021. I can share with you that, as a friend said in a webinar that we did earlier this year, during 2020 we have seen, so to speak, who are more serious and who are more persistent about the business between the two countries, Japan and Israel. We could not travel. We could not, in social interaction became a major challenge, and the players that were left in the field are those, so to speak, that are more serious and that are more willing, despite the challenges, to continue. And this is a phenomena that we saw. I think the business between our two countries is growing. We've witnessed very large transactions this year, despite the pandemic. I think one of the um, important roles that Japan leads is a gateway to Asia, especially given the change, the macro and geopolitical changes that we see in Asia and its impact on Israel. Japan is a player for us as Israelis, to consider in doing business there. And I think what we are seeing in the healthcare space is really an example to all of that. Healthcare space has been traditionally a very, very prominent sector for both countries, and both in terms of collaboration, in terms of technology exchange, and in terms of investments. And I think this year, given the pandemic, has shown all of us that the opportunities are out there, and we just need to, find them and progress with them. In terms of the general market, I'm happy to say that the statistics in Israel are very good. We have seen this year, despite the COVID, still remains a record year. of more than $10 billion investments in Israeli technology startups. This is a 29% increase from 2019. Very, something that many of you would surely agree though is a big surprise. There's almost $800 million of investments made in 73 investment rounds in Israeli healthcare startups. This information is taken from a survey presented by Startup Nation Central. And the main areas are around telemedicine, healthcare IP, EMR, data analytics, wearable, telehealth, mobile health and sensors, and of course around pharma, which has been for many years one of the spots, the main areas in which people are focusing in our relation. So I am shifting the microphone, the virtual microphone, to my friend and colleague Eva San from Anderson Mori Law Firm, who would have a virtual fireside chat with our friend Daniel Kolbar joining us from Israel's embassy in Tokyo. Over to you, Eva.
Shalom and hi everyone. I'm Eva Isaac Nimura. I'm an attorney with Anderson Mori and Tomotsune, which is what we call one of the big four Japanese law firms, and probably the only Israeli lawyer in Japan. I actually am, as you can tell by my accent, I'm originally Israeli. I graduated from the Hebrew University Law School in Jerusalem. And then my career took me to New York initially. I was a lawyer with Latham & Watkins, one of the leading international law firms. Then I moved in-house to Invesco, where I was deputy general counsel in charge. Invesco is actually it's probably the largest private asset management company in the world. I was in charge of private equity, credit assets, and structured product. The next station was in Paris, where I was in charge of capital markets at Natixis, which is a French investment bank. And finally, I'm in Tokyo, and I'm, among other things, my baby right now is to help develop Israeli-Japan business relationships. And healthcare is probably one of the most promising areas that both countries can cooperate on and benefit from. So without further ado, I'd like to move to the virtual mic to Daniel Kolbar, who is the Minister of Economics Affairs at the Israeli Embassy in Tokyo and head of the Economic and Trade Mission to Japan since October of 2020. Welcome, Daniel.
Thank you, Eva. It's a pleasure to be here on this. I think there's a fireside chat. It's a bit cold here in Tokyo, so I wouldn't mind being next to the fire now, but we'll just be on the fireside metaphorically for now.
We could have done it actually in real life. It's not the COVID situation in Tokyo is still quite good, relatively to the world. It's not that bad, I would say.
Right. That's true.
So, Daniel, would you like to present yourself, and then maybe we can just go through some questions?
Yes, with pleasure. So I've been here, as mentioned, since October, and so I still have a lot to learn about Japan. Before coming to Tokyo, I have been 3 years at the ministry negotiating free trade agreements, And before that, when I say Ministry of Economy, so I was at the headquarters in Jerusalem. And prior to that, I was 4.5 years in Brazil. I had the opportunity to open our trade mission in Rio de Janeiro. So we have now 2 offices in Brazil, one in Sao Paulo and one in Rio. And then before that, spent 3 more years also covering trade policy issues at the ministry. And so that's my experience for the government, totaling about 10 years. Before that, I was working mostly in hotel administration. So I studied that, did a bachelor in Switzerland, and worked in Australia, mostly in Thailand and Spain, in this area. And I also did a couple of masters in Israel, one on diplomacy and one on legal studies at Bar-Ilan University. And now I look forward to the next 4 years here at the office. That's their normal time, although it has happened before that some of my predecessors stayed more than 4 years. So, and I'm starting to like Tokyo very much. So already this outlook seems quite good to me. I already want to extend my stay.
Okay, could you share with us some of the opportunities and challenges that you see in the life science sector in Japan?
Yeah, certainly. So as mentioned before, life science is one of the key sectors for us here in Japan. It is in probably every market since it's one of the main sector for in Israel when we look at the number of Israeli companies and their solutions and their need for solutions in the medical care all over the world as the population increases and is also aging, and more money is invested, both public and private, in this sector. So it's certainly very interesting for us, and specifically in Japan, we see a lot of opportunities for the 2 characteristics that I mentioned before, referring to the population, but mostly, and I'll probably focus on that. There are 2 sort of buzzwords that I think are very relevant for Japan and Israel. One is open innovation. So that's been around for a few years, and we've all seen how Japanese companies are going to Israel, scouting Israeli technologies, looking for startups, not only to invest, but also to integrate their solutions in their activities. And by activities, I mean not only in the Japanese market, but of course, Japanese multinationals active all over the world. So that's something very interesting. So the understanding of going out there and looking for innovation elsewhere. And fortunately for us, and we're very happy about it, looking in Israel as well. So every week almost, I have the opportunity since I got here to meet a Japanese company that's going to Israel. As we speak, actually, there's one company that has sending two scouters to Israel. That's the Yamaguchi Financial Group. They're just on a plane. I hope they get there okay, and don't have to do the quarantine when they do, before all the countries become red, right? Also, just a couple of hours ago, I also met a very large company that has recently announced it's going to actively seek innovation in Israel by putting people on the ground, and that's the insurance company, Mitsui Sumitomo Insurance. Right? So, and these are just examples, but there are many, and we are very excited about that. And the other buzzword that I think is very relevant for this sector is digital transformation. And digital transformation, everyone talks about digital transformation in Japan, right? I think since I got here, I heard these words a lot, and I had the opportunity to meet Minister Hirai. He's the minister appointed by the Prime Minister to create the new digital governmental agency. And Prime Minister Suga, in every opportunity, he talks about digital transformation. So we see that there is an emphasis given by the government, and I'm not sure exactly, we'll have to see how it's going to drizzle down to programs and budgets allocated. But there is certainly the awareness that is required to change the mindset and for companies to allocate more resources in terms of digitalizing. I think that's going to be very important. And so in that sense, Israel also has a lot to offer Israeli startups. And when we look at life sciences, obviously technologies such as artificial intelligence and big data, they are very applicable for life sciences. So this is certainly an opportunity there in these areas. In terms of challenges, so you ask about challenges as well. So one of the challenges is, from my understanding, the reimbursements are still relatively low in Japan. Although I do understand that the spending, both public and private spending, in Japan for healthcare is on the increase and is expected to increase quite a bit, especially on technologies. So, but the low reimbursements are always a challenge for companies or for the integration of new technologies. When we look at the country where public healthcare system is so universal and so important. So we'll have to wait and see about that. But still, when we look at partnerships between Israel and Japan, we've seen some good examples, such as Mitsubishi Tanabe's acquired the Neurenderm a few years ago. I think it was 2017, and they're working closely together in order to get some pharmaceuticals out there. It's at the research stage. I had the opportunity already to visit the friends in Osaka a couple of weeks ago. Other examples as well. So we certainly, I'm very optimistic as to the partnerships that are being created between Japanese and Israeli companies, and the momentum that we've seen in the last few years continues in 2021 as well.
Excellent.
You mentioned increasing expenditure. How does COVID-19 impact the sector in Japan? And what I can see is really from a consumer's point of view, but you probably have a different view as well.
Yeah, I think certainly what I mentioned before about the digital transformation, I think that in retro, I mean, when we're going to look back, we're going to see that that's been one of the key drivers for accelerating this process. The need to supply more remote digital services and I mean medical services remotely. The need to share data and analyze data. I think in that sense, that's we always have to look for positive, right, in everything, even in a global pandemic. So I think in that sense, yes, it's going to make a lot of good at the end of the day. But still, of course, if we look at the micro level, so especially in the first few months, a lot of hospitals were closed in Japan, and so that obviously affects their financial situation. And obviously, when you have an economic crisis, so that's going to be as well problematic when it comes to more spending. So on the one hand, yes, so some good aspects, but on the other hand, there are some not so good aspects, and it's a bit early to see how the economic crisis is going to affect business. For now, what we see continued investments from Japanese companies in Israeli companies, and continued companies seeking for partnerships. So we see that, and it's very nice to see, even without face-to-face meetings, right? But in the longer term, I think we'll need So we'll need to wait for the dust to settle a little bit before we know what's the actual impact.
Avi-san, let's proceed to our panel, or if you have any further questions to.
Well, I have a lot of further questions, but I'll continue them with Daniel in person since we reside in the same city. So please move on.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, and thank you, Guy. I want to take the opportunity as well to thank you and for initiating this event. It's very important to bring to the companies both in Israel and Japan the opportunities, and so wishing all the participants as well, attendees, much success in the business, and feel free to approach us as we are here in Japan to assist Israeli companies in Japan and Japanese companies going to Israel.
Thank you so much, Daniel. I think the two very important buzzwords you mentioned, open innovation and digital transformation, are key to making this a success and at least understanding what the Japanese side is looking for. And thank you for that. We are proceeding to our two panels. This webinar is intended to basically deal with the challenges and also opportunities. And I think one of the main challenges when dealing with healthcare and importing healthcare into another country relates to regulatory concern, legal issues, the legal landscape, and so on. Unlike other areas, in healthcare, it plays a major role and impacts the business decisions. I'm passing the virtual microphone to my friend and colleague Tami Raviv, for her to moderate our first panel, which will focus on legal aspects and regulatory aspects.
Thanks, Guy. Hi, everyone. It's a great honor to have you all here. Thank you for taking the time to be with us and join this webinar. My name is Tami Raviv. I'm the CEO of GlobalCom, and I'll be the mediator for this first panel. In this first panel, we will try to provide as much information as time will allow us to discuss the regulations and legal aspects to enter the Japanese market. And we have with us two very honorable people, Mr. Rob Klahr, CEO of HEKA-Bio, the most expertise, knowledgeable, with amazing reputation and connections in the Japanese market, and lots of knowledge in the regulations and BD in the Japanese market. And Mr. Junichi Konto-san, who is a partner at AMT law firm, one of the largest and leading law firms in Japan, with great knowledge and years of legal work in the healthcare field. I'd like to ask you both to introduce yourselves. Rob, can you say a few words?
Sure, thank you very much. So Rob Klahr, CEO of HEKA-Bio. HEKA-Bio, I've been in Japan for 25 years, always focused on the healthcare markets, and I've been very fortunate over my career to have some great mentors. So any of the knowledge and experience that Tami referenced is thanks to a lot of people before me. But we do three things at HEKA-Bio. We do CRO business, contract research organization, which means that companies from overseas generally, but also in Japan, will pay us to run their clinical trials, to get their regulatory approvals, to get their reimbursement listings. And Daniel referenced earlier about the challenges that we do have in reimbursement. So this is the first thing to consider is really, how can you get a good reimbursement in Japan? And that should drive the regulatory and reimbursement. So within the CRO business, we have so far gotten 41 approvals in Japan over the past 6 years, which is quite a leading record. And then we also do BD, business development, as Tami had suggested, so that if a company comes to us and maybe they don't want to pay us right away for our CRO services, we would at that point connect them to a Japanese licensee or a distributor who was willing to take forward the program or pay for the rights for the program in Japan. Within that, we've been able to secure $18 million on behalf of non-dilutive funding for overseas companies coming into Japan. And the third thing we do is we establish joint ventures and ventures in general for companies wanting to partner as they come into Japan. The companies for whom it makes sense to have some more on-the-ground expertise and operations influence as the business rolls out. So a little bit long-winded, but that's what we do.
Amazing. Kondo-san, can you say a few words about yourself?
Yes, thank you, Tammy. Hi, everyone. I'm Junichi Kondo. I'm a partner at Anderson Mori and Tomotsune. So I'm a colleague of Eva. And our firm was established in 1952. And since then, our mission was to support foreign companies coming into the Japanese market and doing business here. And now we have around 500 lawyers, mostly in Tokyo. So we are now, I think, the second largest law firm in Tokyo. And with that number of lawyers, we cover all of the business law areas, like corporate, finance, IP, employment, and litigation too. And for some industries, we also form industry-specific task forces, and I'm a corporate partner, and at the same time, I chair our firm's life science practice group. Thank you.
Thank you. Rob, I'd like to address the first question to you. Could you please provide us a short overview of the healthcare system in Japan?
Certainly. So it's important to understand how big and significant the market is here. So it's big and significant in two ways. One is, can you believe that Japan has many more general hospitals than even the US does? Japan has 7,300 general hospitals and the US has 5,500. So almost mind-boggling, but it's amazing to understand that Japan in many ways has this great installed base, this great infrastructure of healthcare. And this creates opportunities in some ways, but also cost pressures in others. So that's one. Another way in which Japan is quite significant is that it's the second single country market in terms of revenues at 7% of the worldwide total. Still, it's about to be overtaken by China, and nobody can prevent that from happening. But Japan remains the second largest country in the world in terms of a med tech market. And the third thing to mention is that people may not be aware, because there may be some impressions that Japan is difficult to get into. However, more than half of the value of Japan's medtech market is actually imports. And when you get to, and Japan, however, is specifically strong in diagnostic imaging equipment and also in endoscopic equipment, devices. In other areas, many of the therapeutic devices are relying on imports, and nearly 70% of the value of the market in therapeutic devices is actually coming from overseas. So you have these key opinion leader doctors who are very welcoming of foreign technology, very well aware through their relationships with their overseas colleagues of the greatest innovations around the world, and very eager to participate in bringing the best technology to Japan from Israel and from the US and other places.
Thank you. Kondo-san, could you please explain what is needed, sorry, from an Israeli company to reach the Japanese medical market from the legal point of view?
Yes, there are actually so many laws and regulations that apply. Like, for example, as you may expect, there is a foreign exchange and investment regulation that applies to all investment into the Japanese market. And also, if your product is a digital device, then the privacy law would be very relevant. The Japanese privacy law is quite similar to the Europe's one, and very strict. But if you look at the medical market, then the most important and relevant would be the pharmaceutical regulations. There is a law named the Pharmaceutical and Medical Devices Act. And in short, if your device is characterized as a medical device, you need basically two things. One is a business license for your business itself, and also marketing authorization for each of your specific product. Those two things would be most necessary and important to get into the Japanese market.
Thank you. Rob, from your experience, what are the key factors for entering the Japanese market?
Yeah, key factors. You know, would you rather hear about timing or kind of the key success factors? Which angle should we go from?
Go for the key success.
Key success factors, okay. I think the most important ones are two. First of all, understand what is the opportunity in Japan and take a hard look at that. So we know that the pricing landscape, as Japan is a universal healthcare system with a single payer. So look at, you know, what are the reimbursement codes that are going to be available for your device? Be it a hardware, be it a disposable, be it a software medical device, whatever it is, look and see if there's an existing code that you can slide into. If so, great, and your path is quite easy. If not, you have to look at how are you going to be able to create a new code. What are those possibilities? So this involves some upfront negotiation with the Ministry of Health, Labor and Welfare, with the PMDA, the Pharmaceutical and Medical Devices Association, maybe even the metropolitan government, where your company or your authorized representative will be residing. So you look at those things and see what does the landscape look like and how does that map into a market opportunity. For example, you might decide that, okay, there's two ways to get in. One way is the easy way and it's going to be faster, but the reimbursement is low. Can you live with that? Or should you make the inroads in order to make a new category reimbursement code? And what are the potentials, the likelihood for success under both of those scenarios? So look at that. Next thing is key opinion leader doctors, the KOLs. These guys, this is so important. So in Japan, the doctors are really king. There's no better way to say it. And they can very strongly influence the government. They can change the government's attitude about a technology. We always say, start with your home country and the key opinion leaders that you have there. See what their relationships are with Japanese doctors, because there must be some. Japanese doctors are very studious. They're very internationally linked. Look at your key opinion leaders, doctors in Israel, the US, Europe. See who their friends are in Japan. Let's vet those doctors. Let's see if we should add to that list. And let's go out and meet those doctors to understand what's their opinion about the clinical benefit and what is the regulatory benefit pathway that's driven from that, as well as the likelihood of pricing. So I think it's really pricing because you don't want to get to the end of the road and find out that you've got a dissatisfactory reimbursement. And that would, could be a waste of 2 years of effort. So it's really important to lock that in first. Another thing is, we like to suggest that companies come to Japan as fast as possible. Don't leave it 5 years later after CE marking. Come quickly, but don't come too quickly, because Japanese companies and doctors don't like to see prototypes. They would rather that you've got your design lock is finished already. And then let's talk about maybe involving some key opinion leader doctors in Japan for a next generation improvement of the device potentially. But bring something that's pretty much ready. Maybe you're ready, you're getting close to either an IDE submission in the FDA, or you've got your CE mark package ready for submission in Europe. Something like this is about the good timing for coming to Japan.
Totally agree with you. I'd like to ask you all to go into more details about the aspects for entering the Japanese market from the regulatory aspects. Does a product need FDA or CE mark before approaching the Japanese regulatory authorities? What exactly is needed?
No, Japan is among the countries that does not require a reference country approval. It does not require home country approval either. So you can come here first, if you like. We've had experiences where we've gotten approval in Japan in the same week as the US approval was done. And there was an international clinical trial done simultaneously in the US and Japan. Submission was done nearly simultaneously. Approval happened within a week of each other. Great story there. Most of the time, companies will have a CE mark before they come to Japan, but it's not required.
Okay, thank you. Konto-san, do you think it's possible for an Israeli company to operate from distance in the Japanese market? Please give us a short explanation of the process of how, if some Israeli company wishes to open a company in Japan, what would be the process to do so?
Yes, my short answer is yes. And if your product is characterized as a medical device and regulated by the law, then you need some presence in Japan. That can be your own entity as one option. You may want to open up a branch or subsidiary here in Japan, or you may want to find a reliable partner in Japan. But anyway, if your product is a medical device, then you need some presence in Japan. That will hold responsibility for your product. And if you go with the incorporation option, incorporating a Japanese subsidiary itself is quite simple. There is no minimum capital amount requirement, and you don't need any resident director or officer here in Japan. So if an Israeli company wants to open up a Japanese subsidiary, then only with the existing Israeli persons, you can open a Japanese entity, Japanese subsidiary here. And timing-wise, usually it takes only a couple of weeks to open, incorporate a Japanese subsidiary. You have to register your subsidiary with the local affairs bureau, but it usually takes a couple of weeks. But you need to know that for some areas like blockchains and some sort of software, you may need to file a prior notice for the foreign investment regulation, and there is a 30 days waiting period. But it's just a 30 days waiting period, and in most cases, you can go on to establishing your subsidiary by just waiting for the 30 days period. So it's not time consuming either in usual case. But if your product is characterized as a medical device, then having a Japanese subsidiary or branch yourself may not be a good idea at the first step, because having just a Japanese subsidiary or branch is not enough. Under the Pharmaceuticals and Devices Act, that Japanese entity that holds responsibility for the medical device must have a certain organization like quality assurance and safety management, like reporting of adverse effect. And also there are requirements for the chief of such organization, like this type of a chief of this organization must have a pharmacology degree or something like that. So at the first stage, it may be a better idea to look for a reliable Japanese partner. It may be an existing Japanese company, or maybe a reliable partner like Rob's HEKA-Bio.
Okay.
Guy, yeah, we need to move forward.
Sorry.
Actually, I wanted to ask you a question. So if
to ask me?
yeah, I wanted to ask what needs to be considered from the Israeli side, from the legal side. Do you want to give 2 words before we move forward?
Yeah, so I think, first of all, the information here is critical. I mean, what we heard is something that you cannot be ignored from a legal perspective, sorry, from business perspective. And as I mentioned before, you cannot do healthcare without legal and regulatory considerations being taken care of. I think the Israeli aspect is very similar. I can only add additional factors that I would advise, clients when going into the Japanese market, in addition to what was mentioned here before. For example, the consideration around intellectual property, the need to ensure that there is a registered patent also that covers Japan. I think this would facilitate a lot of things for a smaller Israeli startup when having a dialogue with Japanese counterparts. It also creates a clear differentiation between IP that is owned by the startup and additional IP that may be created as part of POCs or other evaluation of technology that is done with the Japanese corporate. And it, of course, protects the IP. And I think it also has a business/psychological effect, showing that the IP is strong, solid, that the technology has basis, and especially if you have a registered patent, I think it is critical for corporates when considering a startup. So that's one thing. And also, this we can speak about this only about this as a whole for an entire webinar, and the need for conducting POCs as a critical part of the process. I think many Israeli startups have this impression that they could jump over the stage and just start selling or start distributing. I think this is experience has proven that this is way more challenging and difficult, and the failure rates are higher when you do not have a local partner, where you do not do POCs, when you do not evaluate how your technology can be implemented in Japan. There are many linguistic barriers, cultural barriers, professional barriers, and of course legal ones. And all of these factors should be factored into the business decision, in my opinion.
Thank you.
Right.
So should we move to the second panel?
Yeah. So with much further ado, after we've learned a lot about legal and regulatory aspects. Now let's talk a little bit more about opportunities. Let's hear from the actual businessmen on the ground how they feel and what how they see the opportunity and the challenge. So we are joined by 2 very distinguished guests. We have Inoue-san from Omron Ventures, which is a very large Japanese a conglomerate doing electronics with a lot of healthcare expertise around the world. Many of you are using Omron in Israel, are using Omron products without really knowing that. They're extremely prominent. So, and Inoue San will speak about her organization, the way they think, their DNA, and also how they do their interaction with startup and technology companies. And with our friend and dear colleague, Inon Dolev, who leads the operations on the ground here in Israel for Sompo, one of the biggest Japanese insurance companies. Sompo is constantly looking for improving and upgrading and innovating its technology and capabilities. And one of the main focuses for them is around healthcare. Sompo is also Japan's largest elderly care provider, which is a close a sector to healthcare. Elderly care is super strong in Japan. And so we will hear also from another corporate how they see the market and the potential. So I will start with Inoue-san. If you could spend a couple of minutes just giving us a short overview of Omron Ventures and your current investment activities.
Okay. Hello, everyone. I'm Tomoko Inoue from Omron Ventures. I'm not sure today's audience knows about Omron, so let me briefly introduce about Omron. So please guess, what is common among digital traffic signals, automated ticket gates, and online cashing machine, and blood pressure monitor? The answer is all invented by Omron. Actually, first, those three are first invented by Omron in the world, and all are like embedded in our daily lives. And blood pressure monitor, those are not first invented by Omron, but the founder of Omron believed that the blood pressure is a really good measurement to control the health condition from home. So when they start selling the product in 70s, there were no one use blood pressure at home, but they collaborated with clinicians, and now there's a large global market in the world. And probably some of you may use the Omron blood pressure at home. And so at least there is one market made by Omron from scratch. And in healthcare field as well. And Omron Ventures, Omron established the first venture capital in 70s. And as Omron Ventures, we were founded 6 years ago. And so far, we invested in 15 startups, and 2 of them are from Israel, and 1 from UK, and 6 from United States, and others are Japanese startups. And with our portfolio company, we really want to create the future of factory, future of smart city, and future of healthcare. What is future of healthcare? I believe that there's a future that nobody gets sick and live healthy and live as much as live and enjoy the life as much as they can. And I really want to realize those future with startups. And here's one example in healthcare segment to illustrate collaboration between Omron and startups. So Omron invested in, at Omron, we have a goal to achieve what we call zero cardiovascular event. Zero event we call, and meaning that blood pressure measuring blood pressure regularly is just one piece of this puzzle. And so we partner with a Silicon Valley startup called AliveCor, and to combine our FDA cleared blood pressure devices with AliveCor's medical grade EKG readings. So analysis of the combined data is extremely valuable to a clinician. So this data can be made available to them via a patient care platform, thereby giving clinicians the ability to provide personalized medical care. So similarly, we invested in and collaborated with other startups that share Omron's vision. And so that together we can work to realize the better future for everybody. So this is quite brief overview.
Awesome. Inon, please share from your side. What do you tell us a little bit about your activities and your background?
Hi, everyone. My name is Inon. I manage Sompo's activities in Israel. For those of you who don't know, Sompo is one of Japan's largest insurance companies. It's also a multinational company, so it operates in more than 30 countries globally as an insurance provider. What's interesting about our company is that the management team has took on a charter to expand our portfolio of services beyond just insurance. And this is where we come in. I manage the digital lab in Tel Aviv, and our job is to identify cool and innovative solutions, technologies in various areas, so that we can actually do business with. We can take them to global markets, particularly in Japan, to create some joint ventures and joint agreements. We also make capital investments in companies. We made investments in 6 companies over the past 2 years. Our digital lab in Tel Aviv was established about 2.5 years ago, and we have now 8 people. And particularly in healthcare, our interest varies, but mostly focused on digital health, mobile health, and elder care solutions that are applicable for the Japanese market.
Great. Can you, Inoue-san, can you share with us a little bit what are the type of investments Omron are looking in terms, in terms of maturity of technology and the markets you are focusing on? Would you focus more on late stage companies, or are you okay also in investing or working with earlier stages? Critical question for the startups here in the audience.
So there's among Omron's group, there are several entities to invest. And as Omron Ventures, we are focusing on our early stage startups, such as Series A and B. The startups who already get the POC and they've already developed a certain product and services. And before regulatory approval is okay, but we need certain clinical evidence to show their efficacy of the product, or at least the concept. And and if it's a later stage, the Omron Corporation or business segment, business department can invest, but we need certain like collaboration activity or synergy to realize. So need more like strategic alignment rather than our activities. And the field, I'm sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
And the field of investment. So Omron Healthcare has 3 pillars of business. First one is cardiovascular, second one is respiratory, and third one is pain management. So we also focus on those areas and also adjacent areas as well, like more basically the chronic disease are something that we want to create the service and yeah.
And as a large corporation, what are your giveaways, do's and don'ts for startups interacting with large corporations, with Omron, and maybe generally with Japanese companies the size of Omron?
Okay, so I love the Israelis' directness, and really I believe that we are really good combination, like complementary relationship. We are really good at make something from 10 to 1,000, and Israeli is really good at make something from 0 to 1. So with a really good understanding of culture, I believe that we can create the world much, much better. And those culture understanding, usually not only Japanese companies, but the American companies or European companies, large corporations are typically taking longer time to make a decision. And there's some unclarity of decision-making process. But more than other large corporations, Japanese are really indirect. And if you go too direct and push the organization too much, probably it's really hard to make the first connection. So from my experience, don'ts is not to push too much and not go too direct. That's
It's really against
one tip.
Israeli mentality.
Yeah.
That's awesome information, and I think all of us have to train or help. I also had a call with Evi-san earlier about this morning. Train the Israeli side to really think not as if they are selling or doing business in Tel Aviv. They are doing in a totally different environment, and cultural differences are critical. Tami, maybe if you could share a word on those huge cultural differences from your experience. You bring many years of great experience and expertise. What should Israelis take into account?
Yeah, it's very difficult to say to an Israeli, don't be Israeli. It's totally impossible. And
sorry for interrupting you. It's difficult, but it's not seen as an insult.
No, in Israel it's not an insult, but it's very difficult to think in a Japanese way because there's such a huge difference. And
interrupt about that also. Just the same difficulty as I spoke with Guy this morning exists for Americans who are trying to do business with Israelis, with Japanese, excuse me. So it's not that we Israelis are particularly bad. We like to usually criticize ourselves, but it's not necessarily that. It could be, but I'm dealing a lot with Wall Street guys, and their patience is approximately 0.1% of the average Israeli. So they also have the same issues that they're dealing with, and difficulty to switch the mindset to the much slower and eventually more thorough, but a different process that exists in Japan. And just thinking about it, this is not something that you can correct at any point of time now, because these differences go back 2,000 years, and to the difference between ancient Greece and ancient China. And they also go back to kindergarten or even before, as far as the socialization of the people. So we can't rule those things out or overcome them so easily. And I'm sorry to interrupt, but this is something that I feel very strongly about.
So I'll quickly just say two things that I think that need to really be taken into account. One is the business pace, like Noah-san mentioned before. Israelis are really fast decision makers, and Japanese investigate and go into details, and this sometimes creates a big gap in expectations. And Israelis, even though they think they have a lot of patience and they've waited, and still time is something to to be considered and to know that Japanese companies are long shooters. They consider business and they look into long relationships and for many years, and they evaluate and they check, and they want to make sure that there isn't a Japanese product or an American solution before they actually look into the Israeli ones. And another something that I think is a key difference is that the Japanese people look into quality. And innovation is less, it's a factor, of course, it's a major factor, but I think quality is a more important factor. Whereas Israelis first look upon innovation, and of course quality is important, but it's not as important as the innovation. And you'd think that sometimes this would make a good match, but I think there's very importance of being having a mediator to assist to mediate the cultures. So of course, when someone knows both cultures, and that could bring great results. And maybe one thing I'd like to say is, when you come to Japan, you need to prepare yourself for a great journey, because Japanese people are amazing, and it's really fun to do business with them. And if it works, it could, and you have patience, it's worth the time and all the efforts. So this is my message.
You know,
I'd like
from your
to add to
perspective,
that, maybe, I'm sorry, Guy, but I'd like to add to that something about the value of the contract, because in Israel or in the US, we are thinking of a contract as a fait accompli. That's the done deal. That's what the deal is. In Japan, the contract is just the beginning. And in many contracts, you will find a section that says disagreements between the parties or other issues will be decided through mutual negotiations. And from a Western lawyer's point of view, that's calling for a lawsuit, because you didn't decide what to do. Okay, we're going to have problems. From the Japanese perspective, the contract is just the beginning. Circumstances may change. It's a long-term relationship, and we'll figure it out along the way.
In the short time we have left, Inon, from your experience, very briefly, what are the things you are looking at in terms of healthcare, and what are your do's and don'ts? Your organization is very different from Inoue-san's Omron organization, and has a different DNA, but still might suffer from the same issues and needs in terms of innovation and so on.
So typically we would look for growth stage companies, at a minimum product market fit, meaning a proven technology or a product that's ready for market, that is priced appropriately, and already has some paying customers. That's key for success. We're not so much good at being design partner of early stage companies, but we are good at taking something that already works in a market and applying it to Japan or elsewhere. And so specifically also in the digital health space, we can take something that already works in another market and take it through the clinical path and the distribution and commercial terms to penetrate the Japanese market in a partnership with a startup. With regards to your question about do's and don'ts, let's start with the do's first. I would say first, know your market. If you're a startup or entrepreneur, and I don't mean knowing your total available market or distribution channel, I'm talking about your customers. So know your customers. For example, in Japan, a high standard of service is key to penetrating the market. And data shows that in ages 60 years old and above, people are willing to pay more for superb service in healthcare, and will prioritize it over other types of expenses, including their own family support. And so if you're a technology company looking to enter the market, how do you provide or how do you build a good customer support and customer service? And if you do it with a partner, is it a tier one partner that has already the standards and the capabilities and experience or not? Another example that is that consumers in Japan are typically price sensitive. In the US, for example, people are willing to pay for digital health apps. In Japan, less so. So if you're a mobile health company or a digital health company, what would be an appropriate business model for you to have a road stage, a good business in Japan? Those are things that you have to know your customer in order to build your penetration strategy into the Japanese market. On the don't do side, you know, a common mistake by foreign companies is to partner with second tier players. There are all kinds of companies in Japan that will promise, you know, meetings with all kinds of top executives. I think in Japan, it's key to get access to decision makers and budget holders. And so one thing I would advise people to do is not waste their time on all kinds of intermediaries or brokers who claim that they have the ability to get you the right FaceTime with the decision makers, but don't. And it's very fairly easy to find out who the tier one partners are in the country. So to avoid that, that would be my advice.
This is awesome. We were acting Israelis today and we did not manage to make it on time. I apologize for the Japanese guests, but this is, I'm sure no Israeli participant will complain about that, but this is our culture. I think first of all, I'd like to thank a lot for all the panelists. I think the discussion was very, very interesting. We could have continued for many hours. There's a lot of knowledge here that is reflected. As all of you could see, also the panelists have shared their email addresses in the chat here. So I'm speaking on behalf of them. Don't hesitate to reach out to us on anything that we could, you know, assist you with. And we are also, all of us are also working together on many things. So I think the combination of expertise is vital. And I'm wishing we use the opportunity to wish all of you an amazing 2021, and that we could start traveling again to Tokyo very, very soon, and be as healthy as possible. So all the best, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
お疲れ様でした。